I came out of Charles de Gaulle Airport there and found one of those little street vendors, and I found a triathlete magazine in the back of one of the. And I literally flicked to the back of the book and found they used to have all the races all around. Found an event in Orange in the south of France, and thought, well,
why not?
Yeah, so I caught a slow train to save me on traffic, on accommodation, sleeping. I literally had $2,000 to my name and an open-ended ticket home, and that was basically, if I ran out of money, I was going back to Australia and the dream was over.
You're listening to Board with Nelly.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Board with Nelly. My guest today, I'm pretty excited about this one. I'm going to learn all about triathlons, triathletes. Chris McCormack, did I say that correct?
Yeah, you got it.
Perfect. I don't know how to introduce you because I feel like introducing you might take an hour within itself. You have so many accolades that, which ones are you most proud of?
Oh, geez. Being a dad, I guess, first, but from a sporting perspective, yeah, just... you know, when I was a young athlete, I wrote out a list of, I was a young triathlete, wrote out a list of events I wanted to win in my career. You know, it was a noble dream of a 14-year-old. So I think I'm most proud of completing that list, you know, winning world championships, Ironman in Hawaii, those sort of events over a 20-year career. It was pretty cool.
That first answer was in case the wife's listening. The second answer is now for the
exactly.
boys.
You got it. You know the drill. You know the drill.
I'm really excited because I'm kind of a newbie to triathlon, the scene, if you may. So if I ask some stupid questions, I apologize in advance, but I kind of want to learn more about the sport, and I'm hoping other people that are listening also kind of fall in love with it or become interested with it. So let me ask you the first question is, when did you first know that you wanted to kind of pursue this career path?
Well, I was an accidental athlete, and I say that, you know, quite openly. My father wasn't, we grew up in south of Sydney in Australia on the beaches. I wanted to be a professional surfer. You know, we lived literally on the sand, and everyone in Australia literally surfs, right? So I fell into running with my father. We had no sporting background except surfing because I used to lose the competitions I was doing as a kid. And back then you used to have to paddle out around a buoy, and it was called priority. The first athlete that got around the buoy had priority on the wave. So I used to always lose priority, which ultimately costed me in my competitions. So my father thought, well, you're not fit enough in his wisdom. Let's go running. So we just started running every day. We had no idea. We just run around the block. And then I quickly found out that over the years, I was a better runner than I probably was surfer, and I started winning national championships and stuff as a schoolboy in Australia, and I just had a natural affinity to being able to run well. And triathlon sort of came in. This was in the you know, late 80s, early 90s, and triathlon is a very American sport, and it started to infiltrate Australia quite rapidly. It really suited our climate and our way of living down here, and we had some great triathletes that were going over and racing in these events in the States. And I was lucky enough to be from one of the towns where one of the great older athletes, a guy called Greg Welsh, came from. And I sort of fell into triathlon through that. I could swim. I was a fantastic runner, and I used to ride to school. So it was just a natural affinity. But I had when I took up triathlon, there was no global sport. It'd be like saying to someone now, I'm a professional Spartan racer, which I'm sure people do, right? But it was very, very similar type of sport now. I had no idea that it'd be an Olympic sport. Ironman would be a monster of a sport globally. It's just at that point in my life, it was something I liked doing. I was, 17, 18, 19. So the most important things in your life at that point are girls, and a lot of pretty girls tended to gravitate towards that sport. So I naturally went that way. So yeah, it was accidentally I fell into it.
It's funny how many things we could probably trace back to that reason, like for men doing anything, you know, like I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to get a big fancy car just to impress some girls or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, with triathlon, they wore bikinis and swimsuits. So I came from running where they were all dressed up. But right. I remember going to my first triathlon and seeing all girls my age in bikinis and swimsuits running. I'm like, oh, man, this is heaven.
Yeah.
Where do I find more of these races? So
I did the same thing with tennis. Yeah, for sure.
There you go.
Exactly. There's no guy playing tennis here in Canada. This is a new sport here. But, yeah. So you had some success with early sports running, obviously, but you didn't see a career path into it. So you went into something your father, your parents told you to do, or kind of pushed you into.
Yeah, without question. My father, the story, my dad wasn't very well educated. I have an older brother and a younger brother. He was determined his three boys would be educated. So my older brother's a lawyer, and I became an accountant. I got put into the University of New South Wales. I got a running scholarship there. My dad sort of got actively involved, not that he wasn't involved in my sport. He used to take me to sport everywhere, but suddenly realized there was a means to an end by being good at sport, because he realized I could get a university scholarship through sport.
Right.
So he really started to encourage my running my later years in life, not around being a professional runner by any means, but to get a university scholarship, which I ultimately got at the University of New South Wales. And you being Canadian, that's also the school. That's how I know Simon Whitfield, who was a Canadian Olympic gold medalist.
Wow.
He grew up in Sydney and went to the same university. He spent the last few years of his high school in Sydney, and then went to the same university before going back to Canada. So Simon and I know each other really well. He went on to win the Olympics. Yeah. He went on to win the Olympics in Sydney for Canada in triathlon. But yeah, it was during that period my father was all about school. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce, majored in accounting, and did my master's in accounting and marketing, and was working at Bankers Trust in my early career, when I was right out of university, which my dad was ecstatic about. But that was when the sort of sport started to take off heavily. I was by that point in my career, I'd done a few races overseas with my federation. I've been talent ID'd as a major talent in the sport of triathlon. Triathlon was looking to make its Olympic debut. Sydney was an Olympics. So I'm a Sydney boy, Sydney Olympics. Triathlon's going to be the first day of those Olympics. Triathlon within Australia got an injection of notoriety and funding. And right. I sort of had a point in my career then where I said, Dad, I want to be a professional triathlon when we go to the Olympics. And he sort of said, don't be stupid. You got a great job. And I had to make that very difficult decision to quit my job against my father's wishes to pursue a dream of being a professional triathlete and going after it in this sport that was really, really starting to explode in the early 90s.
Talk to me about the scene at that time. Was there any cash flow? What were the events like? Did you win any money, sponsors, stuff like that?
Yeah, that time I think was the best in the sport. It was still seen, Ironman is such a massive thing now. Everyone knows an Ironman athlete, but I recall in those early 90s, I'd get on a plane. You go into events in Japan where the winner would win, say, $30,000.
Oh, wow.
It was still seen as a very, like a sport, like, wow. It was sort of people, what do you do? And then you do what? And then nowadays people are like, oh yeah, I got a friend who does triathlon. But back then it was definitely a wow factor attached to it. A little bit like ultra running probably is today.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of these really big events popping up all around the world and attracting very interesting people to those events. The biggest obviously were in the States, Chicago, New York, big event in Los Angeles, a big event in San Diego, big event here in Australia at that time, Noosa, which still exists with 15,000 athletes. But there was a World Series starting to happen, big events starting to happen in Europe, in Switzerland in particular, and France and Germany. And I was sort of at the cusp of that explosion. And the Olympics, the acceptance of triathlon as an Olympic sport in 1994. Boom.
Yeah, that's it, right? The story that I really love is the one where you said you went to Paris, you didn't have much money. This is something people maybe can't comprehend today. There was no internet. You just took a flight, you had an idea of what you wanted to do, you grabbed a magazine, is that true? And then you looked for advertisements of races.
That's 100% true. When I opted to become a pro, I tell a lot of the junior kids now, and at completely different times. When I quit my job, it took me a few weeks to tell my dad, to pluck up the courage to tell him that I'd quit. But I literally sold everything I owned to buy a ticket to fly to Europe to become a pro. Now, I had never really thought what becoming a pro actually meant. I just knew it didn't involve me living in Australia.
Right,
I had to be So the only focus I really gave was around buying that ticket and getting to Europe. I thought once you arrived in Europe, everyone would go, oh, wow, Chris McCormack's here. Oh, let's
roll out the red carpet.
Roll out the carpet and give this training he needs. But it didn't work that way. I arrived and, to no fanfare, nothing. As you said, no internet, no mobile phones. And I came out of Charles de Gaulle Airport there and found one of those little street vendors, and I found a triathlete magazine in the back of and I literally flicked to the back of the book and found they used to have all the races all around found an event in Orange in the south of France and thought, well,
why not?
Yeah, so I caught a slow train to save me on traffic,
Sleeping.
on accommodation, sleeping. I literally had $2,000 to my name and an open-ended ticket home, and that was basically, if I ran out of money, I was going back to Australia, and the dream was over. So
Right.
it was basically race to feed, race to live, and I was racing for Saturdays and Sundays, and finally found a little guest house in a town called Charles in Gap, which is in, I guess, southwest in the Alps, southeast, southeastern side of France.
Not a bad place to stay.
Beautiful, yeah, beautiful place to live, and that became a main training base. And I fluked it. I saw a big money race in Paris in the magazine. It had $20,000 for the winner, and it was a World Cup in Paris. And I rang up to do that event, and they were like, "No, mate, this is a World Cup. You need to be nominated by your federation." I said, "Oh, yeah, but there's no Australians doing it." And at that point, the World Championships were going to be in Cleveland in the US. So the Australian team had opted to be based in Peterborough in Canada. And so fortunately, because there was no Australians in Europe, it was like,
That's
right
it.
place. I was able to get into this event, and I had a fantastic race there. And the president of the ITU, which is the governing body, was a Canadian called Les McDonald, who literally started the sport of triathlon on the Olympic journey. He approached me and said, "Who are you, mate? Like, you've just come.
You just flew over here last week, and you're
fly over here. I've been there a few weeks." And I said, "Look, I just came out of university. I've just quit. I want to be a pro. I want to go to the Olympics." And he's like, "Well, you just finished sixth in a World Cup. Where you've been training? What's federation?" I told him the story. And he said, "Would you like to come to Drummondville next week in Canada?" It was in French-speaking Canada. And I said, "Oh, look, I can't afford that, mate." Like, he said, "Oh, well, you won $3,000 today, and we're sponsored by Lufthansa. Why don't I take some of your money and come over?"
Yeah.
I said, "Look, you got to ask my federation." I didn't know who this guy was. And he's like, "Look, I don't need to ask anybody. I'm the president. I'm going to bring you as a wild card." And so I came over across and went, "Oh, well, yeah, I've never been to Canada. Let's go." Boom. So I jumped on this plane, stayed in a homestay in Drummondville, Canada, 1996. I'll never forget it. Second ever World Cup. Australians who had dominated triathlon for years had only ever won one World Cup with a guy called Brad Bevan. And I came in this event and I won it. It changed my life. Literally. Yeah, it was. So I always have fond memories of Canada. I always raced very, very well in Canada, but yeah, Drummondville, Canada, with my homestay, it just was the launch of my career. And Les McDonald has a lot to do with that. And I guess the flexibility in mind to sit. I already said to myself, I was in that plane going to Europe, just go with everything. Don't.
You're already there. You're already there.
Yeah. Yeah, just don't question it. Just go with the flow. Wherever this journey ends, it ends, right? But don't have any regrets. So I'm glad I kept that open mind and went with opportunities as they presented and explored them. And that literally changed my life.
There's so much value there for anyone that's younger listening to. Like, you're a pioneer in the space in so many ways, and you took this chance. Some people can't even get home without the internet, without Google Maps. You took a flight to a country you don't know, to a language you don't speak, to just pursue something that you were like really hungry about. That's quite remarkable, when you look back at it today. And you were the first representing your nation, right, in Europe?
Yeah, but there was a lot of Australians there, but none of them had ever. Yeah, there was Australians that were basing there. I wouldn't say I was the first, but I was one of the early pioneers that made a home.
Yeah,
made a home there, and it was just a different time. My kids say, nowadays, "Oh, Dad, we went a week without a phone." I'm like, "Dude, I went 35 years without a phone."
Yeah, right.
Don't worry about it, kids. You'll be right. But it was I look back now, and sometimes I tell some of the younger kids, and I can tell they don't understand the enormity of it because they correlate it with today.
Yeah.
You've got your phone, but man, I sleeping in hotels and big maps out. You go bike riding and have these big paper maps trying to work out where to go on a bike ride, and it was interesting times. And Walkmans, you didn't have access to 10 million songs, so you had I had Alanis Morissette tape that I just played
on repeat.
Jagged Little Pill. That was the only album I had.
That's so funny.
It was funny time.
Another question I guess I have around that time frame. There's so much more we know about nutrition today, and the importance of sleep and all these other things that I don't know. Did you have access to that kind of information, or were you kind of learning as you went?
We learned as we went. It started to really the high performance arm started to really come in 97s. Yeah, that early period, 96, 97. Once we became an Olympic sport, it went from. You started to get government funding, which brought in sports science.
Yes.
Now, where sports science was then in comparison today, that early 90s era was the era of heavy drug use by sports athletes. Anyone who followed the Tour de France and I used to race with Lance Armstrong, and we all were in this space for years. And so it was a very different way of approaching testing and science than it was. Sydney changed that game for the better. Australians were, I think, a lot of the Commonwealth. We were very naive. I was very naive as a young athlete arriving in a pro sport in cycling and triathlon in Europe that was exploding, and what was happening in it. It was a massive eye opener, and so the sports science came for the benefit of sport in that sense, because prior to that it was just a zoo. It really was.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah,
you'd race these guys, and I understand it. I didn't understand it at the time, but I would race guys from Kazakhstan, for example, that the yearly salary for someone in Kazakhstan was $4,000 a year.
Right.
And they could go and win
one race
at a race.
Yeah.
And as they tell me, dude, I'm going to cheat, man. If I get caught, I make $500,000.
Yeah.
I would make that in my lifetime.
Right.
But even if they ban me,
who cares? Yeah.
I'm done. Right? So I understood why people did it, but it was a bumpy road that late 90s. That's for sure. A lot of frustration.
Well, if you're trying to, which you seem like at the start of your career, you had bigger ambitions. It's kind of like, I can't go down this route because I want to do it the right way, right?
And there's a cop out, and a lot of people say everyone was doing it, and that's bullshit. Not everyone was doing it. That's the cop out. The drug takers say it, but a lot of the guys you found that did it were not the best guys. So I believe that we're talking about drugs, but I believe that in my sport, a large majority of the people were very, very clean. There was a small majority that were not clean. They were obvious. We all knew it because their consistency was up and down. And they say you can't turn a donkey into a racehorse, but tell you what, you can make a donkey run fast. Right? And you see it, these guys, and especially in my sport where these big swimmers that had so much bulk and naturally shouldn't be able to correlate to being fantastic runners.
Right.
We're doing amazing things on the run. We're, 2 weeks apart, but you're like, come on, guys. So that was very difficult. But the sports science and the evolution of sports science within endurance sports in the cycling and triathlon space, we were able to establish benchmarks that limited the drug use and ultimately find tests for EPO that literally pinged the entire sport that they were there working in. And so it was a very, very, a lot of people struggle with that because a lot of the drug testing and everything that came out in cycling and triathlon and the science that came through that were developed by the people that were in that sport. So,
so they know the most.
Yeah, they knew the most. So it was interesting times. But nowadays the science is really, really dialed in. If you look what the Norwegians are doing now and really where the big monumental improvements are in bike position and aerodynamic drag on the bicycle and conversion of watts per kilogram to actual pace where it's fascinating times in that space.
Is the bike that changed the most since you started, let's say, to today?
Yeah,
piece of technology.
That technology, without question, has changed remarkably. Shoes have changed remarkably in the last couple of years with the new Nike stuff and the Asics and everyone who got those new carbon soles that give back. And they really work heavily in triathlon because they really support fatiguing runners. So triathletes tend to run fatigued because they're coming off a bike. So
yeah, right, of course.
In shoes, keep you in a much better position, give you a lot more spring where you lose it. But bikes have just gone next level. Bikes and clothing. We used to race in singlets that flapped and it's completely different. Now they got aerodynamic suits. So a lot of people are like, why are they riding so fast? In fact, the watts they're putting out are equivalent to what we were doing. If not, it's just they're
getting more use out of them, right? They're getting
more use out of those watts. And it's remarkable what they're doing.
Right. I guess I'm this is where I'm a newbie, so I kind of want to know, if I were to start today, let's say training to become a triathlete, how does one begin to do that? Because from the outside looking in, these numbers that you're putting up, the swim, the run, the bike, they seem so inhuman, but obviously over time they can be achieved. So how do you go from nothing to building into that?
That's the most common question we all ask. I think, people say, how do I do a triathlon? I always say, look, the best bet is to enter one. That's the best piece of bait you can ever give out. Enter a race, even if you've done no training. to get into them, you're looking at 6 months a lot of the time, 8 months minimum, right? And that gives you an accountability to yourself to do the work, right? Because there's no joke. It's not as hard as the distances make out. You never have to do those distances in training, but you need to get the aerobic conditioning and the fitness base to be able to survive those distances. Like it's
interesting.
It's if you're doing a sprint race, you don't need to swim 750 meters without stopping before doing a 750 meter swim. You can do different variations of that during the week, but the consistency of that is what matters. So I always say to people, enter a race and then...
Is that like a benchmark? Like the first race is the benchmark to see kind of where you're at?
Yeah. And I always say the minimum you can do in training is, say, twice the volume. And this is the absolute minimum, twice the volume per week of the distance you're doing. So if you're going to do an Olympic distance, you want to do 80 kilometers minimum a week of riding, which is nothing.
Yeah.
You want to do 3 kilometers a week of swimming, and you want to do 20 kilometers a week of running. You will get through an Olympic distance race quite comfortably doing that. Now, if you can start to get 3 or 4 times the distance, you start to get very, very easy. Now, it doesn't always correlate to Ironman. It's different, but in those beginning distances, and then when you break that out over 7 days, it's not a lot of work. It's one session a day. You may run one day, swim the next, bike the next.
It's the average workout for, a person.
The average workout, average workout. And then it's just, as I said, once you have that goal and you start to roll out some consistency across those 3 different sports, you'll find that way of working out pretty enjoyable. And I always found the different groups of people that exist across those 3 sports are very entertaining. There's some wonderful people, great swim squads you can join, and you make some great friends. There's great bike groups you can join and run groups. Yeah, so
there isn't that much in Canada, to be honest with you. This run group thing is more of a European or more of an Australian, because there isn't that much here from what I've known.
Okay, not even gyms or...
I mean, first of all, it's tough here because 6 months of the year it's unbearably cold, so no one's outside.
Yeah.
And then when it's warm out, it feels like people are like, well, why the hell would I be running in the heat when I can go to the beach for the first time? Yeah. So I don't know, it's tough. But okay, so let's say I have, I've started training, I've got my distances down. How much time do you spend focusing on nutrition, on getting your, vitals, right?
Yeah, it's all dependent upon the objective you have, right? If your objective is to have a good time and finish, then you made a decision to be active to improve your life, right? So, when I say how much time was I focusing on nutrition, not a lot, to be honest.
Really?
I did triathlon because I'm a foodie at heart, so I was able to eat anything I wanted. But I was when I was in the race, when I moved up in distances, when I started doing Ironmans, and then nutrition becomes basically the 4th discipline. How do you fuel yourself long periods of time? But for most of you guys that are doing a sprint distance or an Olympic distance, a gel and a drink and a hydration is key. And a couple of gels are fine. It's not really something you focus on. But you just try and eat a pretty balanced diet. That's the great thing about once you work out, you're able to... Training and working out forgives all the mistakes you make.
I can go get pizza on the weekend or whatever.
That cancels the pizza out. You're beauty. It's when you're not training that you think, that's the 3rd pizza this week. And that's how I'm at the moment in quarantine. I'm like, oh my God, all I'm doing is eating and not working out.
After I go for a swim, the pizza just tastes better. I don't know. I feel like...
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. We've earned it.
Yeah,
you've earned it.
Yeah, I'm really... I was always interested in the earlier days of these things, how much you learn from, okay, my body needs this much rest, as opposed to training every day or every week, and always kind of testing, like you said, the 4th discipline, always testing where you're at without overdoing it, trying to get better, but also not trying to detriment yourself. Seems like there's a lot there.
There's a lot there, but it's a great personal journey. You've tapped into something. But I learned more about myself through this sport, both as both cerebrally, how I react to duress and stress, how I can decompartmentalize things, that I've carried into the business world without question. Triathlon was the greatest educator of me ever, or not so much triathlon, the element of competitive sport within the framework of triathlon was remarkable, even though it was very individual. There's a team I had around me that were a big part of that journey. And then understanding what I was learning about myself on the way, right? Exactly that. When can I work under fatigue? How do I work under stress? How do I...
mental and physical education, because you're learning your body, where your body can go, and you're learning where your mind can go, right?
Yeah, and you build a lot of confidence out of that. We're our own biggest critics, right? So when you start achieving things personally, like, and personal achievement, you value a lot more. When you put a goal out and do it, you go back in your room, you're like, you feel good about yourself.
For sure, of course.
Those sort of things, you take a lot from as a person. And I think you build a resiliency and a strength that is transferable across multiple things. And I without question, I say to my dad, university was important. I learned the fundamentals of education, but what I learned on the life of as a professional athlete and being involved in a lot of the commercial side as well as the training and physical side, I said it empowered me to be a better person, without question, a better father, a better everything. I'm able to. I know who I am, and I'm comfortable with that.
It's that quote, right? If you can master one thing, you can master them all, right? Or something along those lines. So you started winning a little bit when you landed in Europe. You started doing really well. Okay, now it becomes a career path. Now everyone that's doubted you, your boss, whatever, you can say, yeah, look, I did it. So what happened from there?
Yeah, I sort of, as I said, I was a young talent. Then I sort of delivered it as an elite talent. I came back after that 96 year winning Drummondville, and I did my first ever World Championships as an elite, and I got my doors blown off. And one of the older Australian guys who had been a world champion many years before took me under his wing and dragged me back home to train with him and his father.
Really?
So I spent 12 months under their guidance, and I literally went from a talent to a monster. I was unstoppable.
Yeah.
And,
you went back to the US and won 33 consecutive triathlon races.
Yeah. I won world championships the following year. I was world number one all the way through to Sydney. My mum passed away just before the Sydney Olympics, on the eve of the Sydney Games. So the Australian Federation opted to drop me from the team. Didn't think I was mentally ready, which broke me. I wanted to, I promised my mother that I would win that race for her, or perform in that race for her, and win the Ironman in Hawaii. When the Federation dropped me, I took that as a real insult, considering
what you've accomplished.
What I'd accomplished. I was their world champion. I was the current world number one. I'm like, how can you decide my destiny off what you think in a room? Like, I'll tell you if my head's in the right space or not.
They didn't have a conversation with you or anything.
They didn't have a conversation at all. They made a broad stroke decision that with the death of my mother and her being such an important part of my life, that I wouldn't be in the right headspace to win a gold medal for them, and they opted to take someone else. And that was it. I went up yours and I moved to the States. And that was when I went on a rampage, and 3 years without being defeated.
Yeah.
33 races from 33 starts. And I took every opportunity of every one of those races to call out my federation.
Right.
And that was where I guess I got the grizzly. A lot of people were like, oh man, this guy's talks a lot of smack.
Yeah. You had a chip on your shoulder.
I had a major chip on my shoulder, and that's where that all came from. And I think it was the key motivator that drove me to be so successful for those 3 years. And then the Federation ultimately called me to come back for Athens. And I said, look, I hadn't lost a race. I said, look, I'll go to Athens, but you need to pick me for the team now. I need to stay preparing where I'm preparing. I'm loving living in San Diego. And
sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask you how does that conversation go with the same people that counted you out and put you off to the side, kind of?
Yeah, I got a phone. I'll never forget it. I came back and I won the Goodwill Games, which was a massive event here. It used to be run by Ted Turner, and it started when the Russians and the Americans were boycotting each other's Olympics. So Ted Turner came with a great idea, and they had one in St. Petersburg, one in New York, they're all over, and every 4 years. And instead of it being like the Olympics, they would take the top 25 from every sport, would get to, and you race for huge money. And that last event was in London, and I won this Goodwill Games, which was a huge event. It was the biggest paying event in triathlon history at the time.
Wow.
And the Federation, that was like my 35th race win in a row. And they said, look, they sat down with me in London and said, can we have a talk about your future? I said, oh, my future's fine, mate. You want to talk about your future.
Right.
Because without me, you don't get funded.
Right.
I know the game now. I'm not a kid. So we sat down and they said, look, we want to bring you back in. We're sorry about what happened in Sydney, but there's new people in power here. And, the Athens course suits you. You're world number one. You can win. I said, 100%. I'll win the gold medal, but you need to put me in the team now. And we're 18 months out. I'm like, yeah, I get that, but there's no one going to dislodge me. There's 3 spots.
Yeah, of course.
4 spots. Let me take it and let me prepare entirely for Athens. And they said they couldn't do it. And I said, well, if you don't do it, I'll go to Ironman, which is not a decision I wanted to do. Because back then there was no other choice. There was no 70.3 Ironman. That didn't exist back then. There was either World Cup, Olympic Games, or Ironman races. And there was 10 Ironmans in the world. And they paid big money, and it was
so I don't understand this part though. Yeah, I don't understand. How does this work in the sport? There was something called ITU, and then there's
ITU. ITU is the governing body that does the Olympic Games. ITU is basically the world governing. Ironman is a private enterprise, private company.
I gotcha.
That started an event called Ironman. So and triathlon both grew up, but the actual sport is owned by the ITU. Ironman just sold recently for $1 billion, right? The Chinese owned it. They just sold it again. It's a $1 billion company. And all they care about is revenue, money. So back then there was only 10 races, and it was starting to become private equity was starting to come in and buy it because they realized this triathlon thing was exploding. But back then, to win an Ironman had some currency in that, right? It meant something. Now there's 300 Ironman. Everyone's done an Ironman. But back then, an Ironman was
Were the rules the same? Are the rules the same?
Rules the same. It's a very different now because there was always limiting around the amount of people you could have in a race. There was mass starts. Nowadays there's sort of safety. There's rolling starts, and 2 people get kicked in the face. It's a completely different sport. Back then there was 1,500 people in the water. Go. And you did get kicked in the face. Yeah. That was part of the race. But now they have 2,500 people in a race. The drafting, it's a completely different sport. It's just a money-making machine. But it's bigger sport now. But it had more, from a professional perspective, you had a lot more opportunity back when I was racing than you do today, where the opportunities are more around the brand as opposed to the individual. But yeah, so I what I was saying to the federation was, I'm going to leave and I'm going to go to that private enterprise. They want me anyway. They're trying to get me to come over here.
Right.
And it'll be a little bit like UFC, I guess. I'm going to go and fight for UFC.
Yeah, right? I wanted to draw some analogies with the UFC. We'll talk about that later. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm with these guys. I'm going to go fight the UFC, and they laughed and said, "Look, you're not cut out for that. You're too big. You're a power athlete. You're an ITU athlete. You're an Olympic champion style athlete, and all our testing shows you can't do Ironman."
Wait, they said that to you?
Yeah, and they've done all the testing for years on me in my early days. They said, "Yeah, you can't do Ironman," and you know that. And I'm like, "Well, you've left me with no choice." So I literally, they didn't put me on the team. So I entered Ironman and started my Ironman journey that day. I won my first Ironman against the world champion and went to Kona my first year in 2003 as the favorite, in 2002, 3. And I had a 13-minute lead off the bike and blew to pieces and walked and started my humbling career of Ironman racing in Kona because it was a completely different beast.
Yeah.
Completely.
You actually brought up UFC, which is a great thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about. So you said you weren't a great runner in some of your interviews. I heard you said you were better in the water and off the bike. Is that my?
Yeah. I was a good biker. I was a great runner. I was a great runner. But what I found in triathlon was my natural strength. I could execute on the bike and establish a margin of error. And a lot of athletes could run into me. And you sort of started to weigh up. I started weighing up that the advantage of my bike by getting that gap won me more races than.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I was a good runner. Yeah, I was a good runner, but I was
the strategy element of it wasn't there for you.
The strategy element wasn't there for me, and then that evolves as different athletes come. But at that point in my career, my bike was such a weapon. I was a front pack swimmer, and I was so dynamic on the bike, and I could run well. Right. Most big bikers were terrible runners, but I could run strong off a very hard bike. In fact, if it was an easy bike, my standard deviation of run times was not equivalent. I could get 2 minutes up the road on a harder bike and only run 30 minutes slower. Or if I rode with the group, those guys would run a minute and a half quicker and I'd only run 30 seconds quicker. So I used to always look at the ways to best win a race. And for me, it was front pack swim, explosive bike, margin of error, strong run, win. So everyone used to call me a front runner because of that.
So I have not followed the sport for too long, so this is why I ask. Do you watch UFC? Do you follow the MMA?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, yes.
So in the early days of MMA, UFC, it was someone was really good at one discipline, and that could carry them to win fights. If you were really good at jiu-jitsu, you could get guys to the ground, submit them. Has triathlon racing evolved also in that sense, where at the beginning, maybe if you were really good at bike or swimming, you could build a lead and carry you. But now you have to be good at everything, kind of.
Absolutely. That's absolutely. I was the first. So there's the pioneering generation, and they call my generation in the sport, which was the first professionals, I guess they say, that first true professionals. Some of the pioneers were big professionals, not without question, but the big money was in my generation. And I was the first generation where that balance were even across the three disciplines. Where the generation before, there was definitely a weakness. You could swim, but the current generation, what they have on my generation, they grew up in triathlon, where I still migrated across from running, and it happened to be able to swim. These kids are from age of, because of high performance programs in the ITU, 6, 7, 8 years of age, doing triathlon. Alistair Brownlee, the dual Olympic champion, he started triathlon as a 9-year-old.
Wow,
that's crazy. Give you some perspective. That kid he swims as fast, and it doesn't seem that long ago, but in 1996, an Australian called Kieran Perkins won the 1,500 meters at the Olympic Games in swimming. To make that final, you had to swim under 15:30 for 1,500, which is now so slow, but 1996, it's fair.
Yeah.
The triathletes of today would have made that final.
That's
so they're runners.
That's not even their primary thing.
Not even their primary sport, right? They're runners and bike riders. So the modern day triathlete is what they're doing and how close they are to the best in the sport across those individuals is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. In fact, a lot of them are going to running events and putting themselves on Olympic run teams.
Wow.
That's crazy. They're remarkable. They're remarkable. Unbelievable.
There's a lot of things that are very similar with the UFC there, because when you think about it today, like the average brown belt could probably go back 10, 20 years in the UFC and literally choke everyone out because no one had any idea what the hell jiu-jitsu was, or it wasn't really implemented. So it's kind of interesting to see these sports. They have a lot of similarities, actually, if you really think about it.
You see Conor trying to come across to boxing with Floyd.
Yeah.
And that type of stuff. Well, the fact you can do that, and that's exactly the same. And you're seeing a lot of cyclists now, Tour de France cyclists, towards the end of their career, migrating across to Ironman to try and get some Ironmans. Cameron Worth's a good example. He rides with Ineos. Yeah, Laurent Jalabert, one of the greatest cyclists of all time, trying to do it. There's a lot of cyclists now coming. Lance Armstrong wanted to do it, race me before he got banned, because there is those similarities where you have such a big bike ride, you can do it. And Lucy Charles Barclay, the current 70 points.
Did you ever race Lance?
Yeah, me and Lance Nelly had a showdown when he was coming across to triathlon. And you can Google it. We were having a match race, and then he went positive. Yeah, I know Lance. I've known Lance for many years.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. I didn't even hear about that. To me, the sport is really interesting because there's a guy from my city here in Canada, Windsor. His name is Lionel Sanders.
And Lionel, everyone knows Lionel.
And I kind of through a friend here that does a beer mile. He does. He's the world record holder for the beer mile. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah. I know the beer mile.
Yeah. So he told me about this guy that does triathlons. Like, triathlons. Like, this seems kind of like, I don't know. Like, what am I gonna watch a guy swim for an hour or what? I started watching live streams and videos. Like, this is, for some reason, like, they've done a really good job. It's fun to watch. There's so much going on. And I don't know how it was your time, these broadcasted events. I've seen your footage on ESPN. I feel like the viewing side of the sport has also evolved so much.
Yeah. Well, we did that. I own Super League Triathlon, so I really tried to revolutionize the way we broadcast triathlon globally. So that's now the most watched triathlon product in the world.
Really? Wow.
Superleaguetriathlon.com. Check it out. We have 7 major events around the world. The biggest prize purse in the sport, £2 million of prize money.
That's serious cash. Yeah,
it's good cash, and we broadcast all over the world. We got it on YouTube, and we run documentaries. We just did a documentary which you should watch called The Invincible. We've got sub 7, sub 8 happening with part of the Phoenix Foundation, which is an attempt at breaking 7 hours for the Ironman.
Wow.
Which is exactly like the Ineos thing, which will be done with Alistair Brownlee and Christian Blumenfeld, the 2 Olympic champions. So there's a lot of us in this space are trying to repackage triathlon and the way it's broadcast, and my group is leading a lot of that. Yeah, Super League has led the charge on that, and a lot of the stuff you see with Lionel and Talbot and the Invincible documentary, which we just finished the last release, which was
I'll
relevant.
Give that a watch.
Yeah. Vincent Louis, we did 4-part series, exactly what they do in. I copied UFC. Well, I copied 24/7.
Yes.
I love my boxing. So that 24/7 model, I'm trying to implement into creating athlete stars within this sport. because there's relevance to the everyday person. Yeah.
I think when the UFC started doing those embedded videos and it maybe got 50 to 100,000 views, people might have looked at that like, "Oh, what are you guys wasting your time filming this nonsense?" And now it's their best promotion. Like it's not only good promotion for the card they're selling, but it's good promotion for every athlete on that card, because long term they're going to keep building a story, which is going to be easier to sell. And that's kind of what you're trying to do, right, with your sport.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah. What's the biggest hurdle then, I guess, getting the average person to come over and watch triathletes?
Yeah, I think, as you said, trying to understand what it is. I think broadcasts where you deliver, where the community is. It used to be you work with broadcast partners, but now it's hard to condense a 7 or 8 hour race into a 52-minute TV package and justice. So broadcasting is very difficult. The change with OTT platforms now and Facebook and the ability to stream, and that's changed everything. And basically it's about creating heroes and teaching people what they're looking at, what they're watching. And once you get that, it's like golf, golf boring, but I'll tune in and watch it.
Right. Well, now that you have time in quarantine, I'm sure you can watch some from a viewing experience wise, also you kind of have to keep the attention of the viewer, right? Which is really difficult in your sport. Some sports is very easy to do that, but how do you do that with triathlons? How do you keep them always engaged?
I think you got to have a lot of pre-recorded content, a lot of data. And the big difference between fans in triathlon and fans, which we found in most fans, they actually do. So they're much more engaged. A lot of fans that watch football don't play it, right? They're just fans of the team, right? But most people that watch triathlon actually participate in some form of triathlon or running or cycling event. So you've got a more engaged audience. So you're looking at that fleeting audience and how do you engage people that don't have an understanding. So it's all around that long form content, trying to create athlete stars. UFC became big off the back of Conor McGregor, mate. Yeah. Like it was getting big, huge. Don't get me wrong. But Conor McGregor, it showed that people still are inspired by individuals and they need to know a story and buy into a story, whether that's a villain or a hero. That whole rhetoric works and it has worked forever. And it's just where you deliver that content now that's become different, whether it's YouTube and it's sort of segregated your demographic. Most of your demographic on YouTube is relatively young. Most of you, it's how you distribute now that makes it harder, the distribution of content that you have.
What's also really difficult that I find there's so many different events, it's kind of hard to gauge what's going on, what's the significance of an event where you have like established sports, let's say tennis is a good example. You have the 250-point tournaments, the 500, the 1,000, and then you have the slams. Those are the events. Those are the biggest competitions. This sport has so many different outlets and so many different things going on. It's very hard to keep track of everything almost, which kind of loses the value of the events, which, it's tough to probably do.
You've nailed it. And that's exactly what I was saying about the difference between today and my day was there was a world champion every year.
Yes.
Now there's champions everywhere. There's Ironman champions.
It's like boxing, the 9 belts. Everyone has a belt now. Yeah.
That's my argument about today. And the athletes today are saying, why don't we make as much money? I said, because you're a diluted product, mate.
Yeah, there's too much.
Who is the champion? And this guy's done a record. This guy's got a world record on a course that was short. This guy's got mate, there's no substance here anymore. You've got to, and you can't expect these private entities to build substance because they make their money out of mass participation. They don't care about you, right?
That's true.
You need to rely on companies like me, Super League, and buy into my story. Otherwise, you're doomed.
That's the one thing that's really unique, though. If you think about it, there's no other sport where the fans can be in the water with you in one of the races. Where else can you do that? There's no guy in the cage with me when I'm, watching.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Right.
That's actually
that's the value piece. But yeah, it's a very different time nowadays. That's for sure.
When you say there's like villains and heroes and stories, who are the biggest personalities in the sports? I only know like the Lionel Sanders because hometown and stuff like that. But yeah,
Lionel's a big name. Lionel's considered a hard worker, like a working hard. He wins, but he doesn't have the talent of the big guys. He's just a really, really hard-working guy, and he's got a big following.
Obsessive about his.
Yeah. I don't know how he's going to be when the sport stops for him when he ages.
Right.
He seems like that obsessive-compulsive personality guy. But there's Jan Frodeno, a German. He's remarkable, Olympic champion. the Norwegians at the moment, Gustav Iden and Christian Blumenfeld.
Fun personality, Gustav.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They're huge names. And Alistair Brownlee is always a massive name in England. He's a dual Olympic champion. His brother won the Olympics in Tokyo in the team event. They're the big names. We got a team called the Bahrain Endurance 13 team. We work for the royal family of Bahrain, and we have the top 13 athletes in the world, and they're on that team. And they're basically the gold standard, that team.
I'm really excited what you are going to bring to the sport. I was always wondering, after you finish your long career and you've, how do you keep up? How do you have that same drive, that same passion, or can you even do that? Is it possible to continue to something else, to bring the same kind of determination?
Oh, without question. I think I look, when I retired, I was frustrated with a lot of my peers because I thought they were such amazing adversaries as athletes. And you learn so much about an individual when you go to battle with them in a triathlon, and you have this mental war, and you realize how strong, so much respect for them. Man, you're a tough bugger. You know what I mean?
It's like a fight. It's another UFC analogy.
Exactly.
Great, yeah.
You're a tough guy. Whether I beat you or not, man, I have a lot of respect for you. And then it's like when you take them out of that environment, they wilter. I'm like, well, why can't we be giants in another realm? And that's sort of when I retired. I was like, right, I'm doing this. Everyone laughed. I don't like what they're doing in triathlon. I'm going to change it. And everyone's like, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to change it. I just applied the same mindset I did as an athlete to business, where it seems that when a lot of people retire, they retreat and they get defensive and they don't take the same risks that they did as athletes. They live a completely different life and wonder why it's not going the same way as it was when they were athletes.
Right.
As an athlete, your whole life's a risk. I quit my job to become an athlete.
Of course.
Risk about that. And you were young then. I'm like, whether I was young or old, it's a mindset. And I really felt that when I entered the business world. And I find business easier. It's an easier realm to exist in because there's a lot more of it than the boutique world of business, of being an athlete, but the principles are the same. Almost an obsessiveness to a goal, focusing on a goal, working out solutions to the problem, coordinating that with people, communicating your needs, getting the work done. I found the transition to business relatively easy. In Super League now, and everyone laughed 5 years ago, is now the biggest in the sport. And
right, beautiful.
Around $1 million valuation, and everybody's like, wow.
Yeah. Who would have thought this guy that, said he was going to do it?
Yeah. Same with the teams. And now we have the Phoenix Foundation. We do the Phoenix. We're doing the Sub 7 event, sub7, sub8.com. That's the big event in June next year. If you watch it, it's exactly like the 2-hour project for Kipchoge with Netflix.
Right. Like, beautiful. Wow.
People are like, why? How? I'm like, well,
they was there. Someone had to just do it.
Why not do it? Why not do it? What, and that's. Yeah, I say to any athlete that's retiring, you can do anything. Take your network is your net worth, and
that's very good. Yeah,
and have a crack at it. Yeah.
What's the I think you talked about earlier in your career. You said you were a little bit smug sometimes showing up to these races. You felt like you could kind of, maybe that's a bit rude to say, but you said yourself that you thought you could win some of these races without actually doing everything that you needed to do. What's the advice you would give someone younger right now in their, if they're starting out their career?
Yeah. We just did great questions. We just did a futures camp as part of our Mana group, the Phoenix Foundation. Futures is that we take the best 30 junior athletes from a region. And this year it was in Europe. And it was myself, Usain Bolt, John Stephenson, Ola Rod, she's a climber, Nicola Spirig. There was a whole bunch of old athletes. And it's basically a mentorship program to show kids how to transition from being successful youth and juniors to elites. So This is probably all these 30 athletes will probably be targeting Paris or Wimbledon in a few years. So it's tennis players, karate, athletics. So they're all with us in Lausanne this year. And that question came up to Usain Bolt, who, in my opinion, is one of the greatest athletes of our generation.
Without a doubt, yeah.
And they said, what advice would you have, or what advice would you have for one of the kids? What advice would you have for a young Usain Bolt? If you could have it all again, what? He said, I know the exact advice. Get serious now, right? And those kids were 16. And so Usain said he took too long to get serious, even though he had a great career.
Yeah.
He's like, I underperformed people, right? And everyone's like, oh, my God. He's like, I underperformed. I'm telling you. So I'm telling you, get serious now. And time, you don't have time.
Right.
You do not have it, right? So you have to fix problems now as they present and work forward. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. He said, solve problems as they present and get serious now. And that's, any young junior athlete, that's what I give. And to any amateur who's talking about, I want to do a triathlon next year. Well, next year never comes, right?
Yeah.
You enter it. Do it now. Get serious right now. Not tomorrow, not next day. No. And once you do that, you build accountability in yourself. And once accountability trumps motivation every day of the week.
100%. Yeah, that's very true.
Once you're accountable to something, you're accountable to yourself, and you're less likely to let yourself down. And that whole momentum, and luck to some degree starts to change.
Once you show out, it's like hot yoga. Sometimes I go to hot yoga and it's a nightmare in there. It's like 40 degrees Celsius, but everyone else is doing it. I see the old lady at 70 doing it. Am I going to stop? Am I going to stop in front of Janice who's 70? No way.
Exactly.
But you're not the first one that I've heard say that, because I've heard Serena Williams' coach say the exact same thing. Patrick Mortoglu, I forget. Yeah, he said the way he got that coaching job was when Serena was in Wimbledon, he was there. And she was interested in a coach, and, she came up to him and she asked him what he thinks he can bring to the table. And he's like, this was when she won like 15 Grand Slams. He's like, I think you're underachieving. Like, he flat out told her, I think you're, and this was something that no one ever told her in her career. She won 15 Grand Slams. She was on the cover of every magazine. She was the most successful tennis player in the history at that point. And he's like, I still think you're not doing the best you could. And he immediately got the job for that.
Yeah. It was true.
Insane. I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. We're running out of time. I usually do an hour. I don't know how much time you have. I kind of want to just run down some of the more interesting races in your career. Maybe you can run me back a little flashback. Because I feel like that sparks the most interest when you tell me, there was a close finish line sprint or whatever it was. So the first one I have is your 2000, was it? Oh man, I forgot the date. In Roth, Germany, was it 2002?
I had a sprint with 2003, I think.
2003?
Second ever Ironman I ever did against Lothar Later. Lothar was the first man to ever break 8 hours for the Ironman. He was a monster in Ironman racing. I was new to the sport, and that was the first defeat I had in years. But he beat me in a sprint finish. The whole day I thought I had it won because I was naturally faster than he was. So I thought, because he had the experience, I'd just follow him all day. And I swam in front of him. He caught me on the bike. We rode together, and we literally ran every step of the marathon side by side.
Wow!
And Roth is an amazing race. There's almost 1 million spectators, and the last 3 or 4 kilometers, you're 5 people deep of Germans going bananas.
Was that the changing factor, the home crowd and the Germans cheering him on?
I think a bit of experience and probably my inexperience. I was that confident that I had it won. I was just going to out sprint him the whole way. I thought, no, mate, you got to try and get rid of me. My whole focus was, I'm faster than you. So at the end of the race, I'm going to out sprint you. So your job is to get rid of me. And he kept trying to get rid of me, and he couldn't. So I was building confidence off that, not realizing that he had a dynamite sprint as well. And sprinting at the end of an Ironman has nothing to do with speed, but it's everything to do with strength, right? So I hadn't learned that lesson until that day.
Mental strength, you mean, or physical strength? Mental strength.
Physical strength. Your legs, your body, so you can't drive your legs up. Your natural spring action is to drive, but your whole hip flexors are cramped. Everything's gone. So I was it was only my second Ironman, so I had never been in that position before. And when we made a move about 400 meters out, he positioned himself on the inside, got the inside run around one of the corners, which was a little gap, and that gap just stayed 2 body lengths for 400 meters. We sprinted, which probably wasn't a sprint at the end of an Ironman, but
it felt like one.
It felt like one, and 50,000 people were going bananas. I remember crossing the line, and it was deafening. We both collapsed at the end of the finish, and I was on the ground. It just did not stop. And I remember looking up. I didn't realize how big the crowd was until you sort of sit up in the stadium and you look down the rail. Oh my God, this is massive. And then he helped me up and was like, mate, welcome to Roth. And that was a race I ended up coming back every year and won it 5 times after that. But that race I was happy to lose that one because he was the king of Roth.
Yeah.
His 4th win, and I ultimately went on and beat him the following year, and we built this. We created this amazing rivalry within this event.
Maybe it was better that you lost, because then that put you.
It was 100% was. Yeah, it was 100% better.
For people who haven't seen the footage, it's unreal. You posted on your channel. It looks like something out of a movie, like a Rocky movie or something.
Yeah, amazing.
Another one that I want to discuss was Hawaii. Your biggest, toughest challenge, probably Hawaii, right? What made that island so difficult to race on?
I'm naturally a bigger guy. So most Ironman athletes at the elite level, professional level, are really light. There's just deficiencies with heat. And, that's where Lionel Sanders struggles a lot in the way. He got second there, never won it. For me, I was all in, all out. I didn't want to come sixth or fifth or fourth. Now that I didn't want to build a career on fifths and fourths. And so people say, oh, you failed so many times in Hawaii. I'm like, yeah, I got fifth and seventh and sixth, which people have a career on. But for me, it was win or nothing. That was like it.
Once you have high standards, that's what you're accustomed to.
And I struggled. I got second there. I got fourth there. And there was a point there where I didn't think I could win it. My best ever race was the year I got second in 2006, I think. I got beaten by 70 seconds in a war with a guy called Norman Stadler who had run the race twice before. We had a very strong rivalry. And, he beat me this year, and probably the best race I ever executed there. Second best, the best was 2010, but
2007 is when you won, though. No,
2007 I won.
2006 when you lost was better than the 2007 when you won.
Well, 2006 I won easily. It was I couldn't believe it.
2007,
super hot. 2007 I won easily, but as a performance, 2007 I was never challenged at all. I was in the comfort mode. Yeah, not at all. I was happy to win.
Right.
I was challenged a little bit on the bike. I set a blistering pace on the marathon, broke everybody, had a 7 or 8 minute lead, and was able to jog the last 5 kilometers and celebrate. Right. But 2006, I was in that race to the last step. I ended up in a medical tent with 2 liters of IV in me. Wow. I'd never pushed myself that hard. And I was so satisfied with the result because I couldn't have gone any harder. I was beaten by a better guy. That was my best performance. And I was beaten by a guy who, it was a changing of the times. He came out with a swimsuit at the time that ultimately became the standard of swimsuits, the new long sleeve, long arm, speedo. Back in the day, we used to wear Speedos and tuck our singlets into the Speedos, right?
Yeah. Or you would change in the tent.
We changed in the tent.
They didn't even give you privacy. The German footage.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's privacy.
Exactly. And that's what he came out, and he used to swim a few minutes behind us, and he got out that year with us because of the new technology and won the race. So it's to be part of that whole evolution that he brought to the racing, and then to have a great race, finish second, and then to have the career after it. I find that event in a way very satisfying because I was never supposed to be successful there because I sweat so much. I'm big. I have problems with heat dispersion. I won every other Ironman I ever did in the world, like 18 of them, 19 of them, but I struggled in Kona because of that heat.
In 2010, something that really stood out to me, that it's a really interesting thing. You said that, I forgot the name, Rellert, is that his name?
And Andreas Rellert.
You went to the last kilometer, couple kilometers, and you realized that he needed water and Coke or whatever, and you went in front of him to take the drinks before him, and then he would kind of lose his rhythm, struggle to find the next one, and then you took off.
Yeah. Well, when I was naturally in front, what do you do in an aid station, which is a natural play, because you usually only have 3 or 4 volunteers, and usually a group of athletes hit an aid station, there's 6 or 7 of them, so it's first in, best dressed, right? So when I heard him screaming for Coke and water, I was already in front of him, and I wasn't going to go through that aid station because we were literally a mile from home to win the World Championships, and we just had this war, and I was trying to feel each other out, and I was more shocked that he was going after fluids this close to the finish line. I'm like, mate, you go for fun. And then one part of my brain said, well, if he wants them, he needs them more than me. So I just went straight over and I grabbed them, started tipping the water on my head to cool off. Right. And then I could hear him yelling for water. And then I just voice in my head went, boom, go. So as he was looking for water, I hit the gas.
Did he lose a little bit of rhythm and then you kind of took off?
Yeah, well, you naturally do. You're looking, when you're running and you're focused ahead, you got your rhythm and everything. Yeah. When you're looking for water, hands that are holding cups, you're like, hey, you're naturally out of rhythm. So it's a perfect time you see in any marathon at the Olympics or anything, most attacks happen around those water stations, aid stations. It's when people are naturally out of their rhythm. So it's a tactical move. And I used it to win that race in 2010 and broke his spirit so close to home.
Well, at that time, was that something anyone would have thought? This is my question, I guess. Or is that something that was kind of, there's levels to this game kind of moment and you just figured it out? Or was that normal to have people do that kind of thing?
No, I think it was a game time moment. I think you're looking. Yeah. When you're at that point of a race, I always tell about an Ironman, you're so physically and mentally stripped. You're so raw, mate. There's no more lying to yourself. That's what the beauty about an Ironman is when you're suffering. Can I just pause? I
No
think
worries, no worries.
Sorry, it's my food drop off for the day in hotel quarantine.
No worries, no worries. So yeah, I was asking that moment when you figured that out, was that a normal thing that you think anyone would have figured out, or is this something that kind of when we like talk levels to this game moment?
It's top level. Without question, it's a strategic game. And a lot of people, and amateurs in particular, don't realize the strategy around. They think an Ironman is just complete the distances.
Yes.
But at a racing level, it's about being reactive. It's not as if I lose a race in an Ironman by over 8 hours pulling away like 1 second every hour and I win by, you win a race in a moment. Most of the time in an Ironman, you feel comfortable. But it's only these storms that come, and storms of pain and agony that come, and how you react in that moment that ultimately loses you a race, whether that happens on the bike or in the run. And so as an athlete, you try and take on board that when you feel good, you push. And when you're struggling or these storms come and you're dealing with emotions and pain and everything, then you sort of shelter up, shell up and fight that storm as it's happening, and that'll go away and then you push again. But at the end of a race, you are so emotionally and physically stripped. There's nothing left to give. You're just 100% agony, you fear. Right. It hurts to run, hurts to breathe. It's hot. You're burnt. Your skin's burnt.
Right.
You're just over it, and all as you have is your sanity to some degree. So when you're looking for weaknesses in your competitors, because that emotional confidence that comes with them being weak and you not being weak at that moment is so empowering.
Yeah, gamesmanship at the purest.
Yeah, gamesmanship. When he's calling for water, I'm like, oh, he must be hurting. Right. So this positive emotion, he must be hurting. What does he need? Water. I don't need water. These are the conversations you're having with your head, and then suddenly when you sort of compute, he must be hurting. Go. Yeah, it's sort of that type. It's sort of that type of opportunity. You're an opportunity. You see an opportunity and you seize it.
Right.
And when you commit, as I said, when I committed to that goal, it was like, all right, this is it. I'm all in. There's don't second guess back. Yeah. If he catches you, it's over. But I remember saying to myself, this is every single track session you've ever done. This is every time Dad drove you to the athletics track as a kid. This is every day you've been away from your kids. This is everything. I don't care if you rip your kidneys out to win this thing. Do not look back and just suck up the pain. It's only going to be 10 minutes and go.
You don't want to have a regret either. That's another thing you can't.
You don't want no regrets. You just want to commit, be all in. Make sure if it's UFC, make sure it's a knockout punch, not make sure you put him down.
I don't think there's a better way to end than that. We talked for an hour. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything you're working on that you want to plug? I see you're uploading YouTube videos once in a while. Are you going to keep doing that?
Really. Yeah, just follow everything. If you're into triathlon, follow what we're doing at the Mana Group. But sub7sub8.com is a major event we're putting on. If you love triathlon, it's going after the world records in Ironman. Be all on Netflix. We're putting out great documentary series around that. And follow everything we're doing.
Beautiful. Awesome. Extremely grateful for your time, Chris. Thank you so much.
No worries. Too easy.